What's your secret that could literally ruin your life if it came out? Story 1. My boyfriend at the time cheated on me, and the girl he cheated with made it a point to tell everyone in our small town. It humiliated me. So I created a fake Facebook account, pretending to be a boy, added her, and talked to her for 8 months, becoming her confidant. She shared all her secrets with me. Eventually, I reached a stage where I asked her to send me some personal photos, and she did. Those photos ended up being circulated around town, along with screenshots of our messages. She got expelled from school, and her family cut ties with her. Her life changed completely. She faced so much backlash that she had to move to a different town. Last I heard, she was unemployed, living in difficult conditions because her parents had disowned her and she had no financial support. To this day, she has no idea who the boy really was. Story 2. This isn't something terrible, and I don't think it would ruin my life, but it makes me very uncomfortable. I have a mild case of psoriasis on a few areas of my skin, but one particular spot stands out. It's around my lower area. It's essentially a rash that never goes away. Every night, it gets intensely itchy, and I end up scratching and peeling the skin, sometimes even causing it to bleed a little. It's almost like an impulse I can't resist. I take fish oil and go tanning because it's supposed to help, and it seems to work for every other area except that one spot. I assume it's because I keep scratching. Story 3. This secret might not ruin my life, but I've carried it with me for a long time. My grandfather was my favorite person in the world. He even moved from NJ to FL just to be closer to me. We spent all our time together, and he was my best friend. Eventually, he was diagnosed with cancer, and my mom took him in to care for him. Even though she was no longer married to my dad, and he wasn't her real father, she's incredible like that. As he got worse, it became harder to talk to him, and watching him fade away was heartbreaking. He stayed in my room for a while, and I slept on the couch. Seeing him like that was really tough, but that's not the secret. When he first moved in, he had about $400 in cash, which he left on my dresser. He never touched it, even as he grew weaker. When he went to hospice care, the money was still there, so I hid it. I was only around 12 at the time, and it felt like a fortune. I thought I'd keep it safe for him until he got better. But as things turned out, people don't leave hospice care. When he passed away, my world shattered. My dad and uncle started fighting over the inheritance. I decided to keep the $400. Part of me felt like he wanted me to have it, but another part felt like I was taking something that wasn't mine. It weighed on me heavily. In the end, I suppose karma played its part. My grandfather left me and my sister about $10,000 for when we turned 18 or 21. My dad, with no real financial knowledge, decided to invest it. And then, well, the dot-com bubble happened. That was the end of my little inheritance. I have another secret too, one I never told my dad. When I was struggling financially in college, I sold all the baseball cards he'd left me, his pride and joy that he spent years collecting. I felt it was justified since he stopped supporting my mom. Oh, and one more thing. I also sold the autographed baseball my grandfather gave me, signed by Ted Williams himself. That ball was priceless to me because of my grandfather's influence. I deeply regret letting it go, especially now. If I could turn back time, I would hold on to it forever. But I still have your purple heart, Pop-Pop. I look at it often. Story 4. When I was around 14, my mom was very busy with a new business. And my brother was in college, so I was mostly left on my own. My older sister, who was 22 at the time and practically raised me, stepped in because my grades were dropping, and I wasn't going to school regularly. I was just lazy, not a bad kid. My sister had a boyfriend who I'll call Joe, and he'd been around as long as I could remember. He was a mechanic, very laid back, from LA, and about 4 years older than my sister. Joe was into lowriders, and one evening I asked if I could go cruising with him, just for fun. He agreed, but he said not to tell my sister since I would normally need her permission. Being 14 and naive, I promised I wouldn't say anything. I thought we'd just go to a car show or something similar. Instead, Joe took me to a local arcade and restaurant where he ended up drinking quite a lot. On the way back, he began a strange conversation about physical boundaries and tried to make me question my understanding of what's acceptable. I was young, so I didn't fully grasp his intent, but I sensed something was very wrong. Then he told me we had to get a hotel room because he couldn't drive home after drinking. I felt very uncomfortable but didn't know what else to do, especially since I didn't have a driver's license. Once in the room, he made me feel increasingly uneasy, but I didn't know how to react. I was scared and unsure of how to protect myself in that situation. The events of that night left me feeling broken and isolated, unable to tell anyone because I was overwhelmed by shame and fear. A few months later, Joe called me, telling me that the only way to ensure no one ever found out was to bury the hatchet his way. He pressured me, even suggesting he would tell my sister his side if I didn't comply. This led to a cycle where he would continue to manipulate me, contacting me with coded messages. My sister, seeing Joe as family, never suspected anything was wrong. I was trapped and felt forced to comply for years, just to keep my sister from the heartbreak of discovering the truth. This continued for a long time. Each time I felt more and more defeated, and it got to a point where I felt like I had no control over my own life. My trust in others has been shattered, and this experience left me with serious emotional struggles, which I still deal with. Joe is still with my sister, and she remains one of the closest people in my life. It's painful, especially because she went through a similar ordeal in her youth and vowed to protect me. Today, I'm trying to leave this behind. I've chosen to act as though nothing happened, even though it's incredibly difficult. I have trust issues and struggle with anger because of what I endured. But I've chosen to stay silent, even though it hurts. Sharing this here feels like a small release, a way of finally telling someone, even if it's just strangers on the internet. Story 5. I'm pretty happy and confident with good health and get respect from people I know. When I was a teenager, I used to go out late at night and sneak onto farms, driven by feelings I didn't understand at the time. It was a strange phase, influenced by a lot of things going on in my life. I was dealing with a complex family situation, with a mother who was challenging and often unpredictable. She had a lot of control over me and created a tense environment at home. Sometimes things would get physical, and I often felt alone and misunderstood. Therapy was a huge part of moving past those years. And although it wasn't easy, it helped me work through family conflicts. I ended up confronting my family about many painful issues, and it's led to healthier boundaries for me today. My mom's struggles, along with other issues, made it difficult to trust. But with time, I've been able to distance myself from the negativity. Now, I only keep close those who genuinely support me, and I've managed to feel like a complete person again. My girlfriend knows everything, and she even helped me reconnect with my grandmother. She's been a huge support, especially in understanding why I've chosen to keep some distance from certain family members. Now I feel healthier and more successful than ever, surrounded by people who lift me up. Anyways, I've got friends waiting for me to go out, so that's all for now. Story 6. This is my first post on Reddit, so here it goes. I have a few psychological issues and know I need help, but I don't really want to get it. I know deep down that I might struggle with dark thoughts, and I've come to terms with this in a strange way, even though it's not an easy topic. My biological dad has never been in my life, and I sometimes feel different from my half-siblings. They're all athletic, while I'm the only musical one in the family. It adds a lot of emotional stress, especially since I deal with bipolar depression and severe anxiety. I've been in mental institutions, seen therapists, and talked to school counselors, but nothing really seems to help. I often end up pretending to feel better just so they'll leave me alone. The pressure builds up over time, and I don't always know how to handle it. I stopped taking my meds because I feel like they dull my creativity. And music is the one thing that makes me happy. I know it's not ideal to stop my meds, but I just don't enjoy taking so many pills every day, especially not when I'm only 19. I'm attending community college, but don't know what I want to do with my life beyond writing and performing music. It's been my only escape since middle school, and what keeps me going. I feel like a failure sometimes, living with my parents without a job or money. I'm not doing well in school and might end up dropping out just to get a job and move out. All the pressure since middle school has led me to self-harm occasionally. I've struggled with these feelings for a while, but I find comfort in the music and in the creative process. Story 7. When I was little, back in the days of 56K modems, I was a 12-year-old kid exploring the internet while my parents were out of the house. I managed to stumble upon a camgirl site. Things were different with billing back then. You didn't have to enter a credit card. You just clicked accept on the site's front page and the charges went through the phone line. I ended up having a simple conversation with someone, just like you might find on any online chat. Then a window popped up showing a bill for this private chat, and it was around $700. I realized what happened and freaked out. I cleared all the history and temporary files and never mentioned it again. A few months later, my parents were shocked to get an unusually high phone bill for a service they knew nothing about. They asked me, without much suspicion, and I just denied knowing anything about it. They told the phone company it must have been fraudulent, and somehow the bill got dropped. So at 12 years old, I unintentionally got $700 worth of service without paying. I'm sorry, miss. You were very nice. Story 8. I joined just to comment on this. I've been on Reddit for a long time, but I've never felt the need to create an account. Reading some stories here has brought back guilt and shame I've tried to forget for almost 10 years. Backstory. When I was 18, my mom remarried and moved out of state. She let me stay in the house we lived in because she didn't want it to be empty. I was working as a dancer and had dropped out of high school. In hindsight, it was probably not the best idea to leave me on my own. My boyfriend at the time was everything I could have wanted, kind, intelligent, and out of my league, though he didn't know it. About a year into our relationship, he had a crisis, feeling he was missing out on life. He broke up with me because of this, and I was heartbroken. Things got more complicated because I couldn't afford to live on my income. I ended up starting a relationship with an older man who had shown interest in me for a long time. He moved in to help with expenses, but I was unhappy. He discovered my online diary, so I started pretending in my entries that I was happy. A few months later, my ex-boyfriend found my online diary, looking for my email address, and read everything I had written about this other guy. He was upset, and I couldn't explain since the other guy was right there. I asked him to call me the next day, but he never did. Months later, one of his friends came to my door to tell me he had passed away in a car accident, with no sympathy in his tone. I realized his friends must have thought I was a terrible person. Later, I found out he'd been looking for my email to send me a letter. A friend gave it to me. It was full of apologies, wanting to try again, saying he loved me. My world fell apart. I couldn't function, couldn't eat or sleep, and dropped a lot of weight. The man I was living with grew angry that I wasn't moving on and treated me poorly. Eventually, he left, taking everything from the house, and I was left with nothing, not even power. Things are better now, but I have lasting health issues and always feel like his passing was my fault, as if everything that followed was a punishment. Story 9. I had a fraternity brother who was really difficult to deal with in college and who hazed me a lot. Back then, the system allowed students to log in to register for classes, and he, as a senior, got first pick. This was around the time the internet was becoming widely used, and logins were just a person's name, with the PIN as their birthday. I logged into his account and dropped all his classes 3 days after they started. He didn't find out until midterms when the professors submitted his grades. The school refunded his tuition, but he had to spend an extra semester in college. Second story. I've never had a lot of confidence and find it difficult to ask girls out. I met my current wife by using a keystroke logger on her computer and intercepting her messages and chats with friends until I confirmed she liked me. That way, I knew exactly how to approach her and orchestrated our early courtship to my advantage. If she knew, she'd likely be very upset as I delved deeply into her personal life and learned some very private things about her past. Story 10. My own parents cared so little that they told me I was an accident and would even throw it in my face during arguments. I was the only reason they stayed married, and they were miserable together for 18 years. I grew up in a tense, often frightening environment where I experienced both emotional and physical neglect and abuse. There wasn't always food in the house, so I didn't start eating breakfast or lunch until I was in college. Because of this, I've always desperately craved attention, especially from men, and I've been that way since I was 14. I became attached to any man who seemed like he cared about me. I had some very painful relationships, including a time when one partner held me down during an argument. And after that, I even caught an illness. In my late 20s, I moved to a new place to live with a genuinely kind man who truly cared for me. Unfortunately, he eventually broke up with me because of my insecurities and emotional baggage. Now I have 3 friends, but we're more like drinking buddies than anything else. I have no relationship with my family. They never reach out, and I feel completely alone. I live by myself, and every morning I cry before heading to work. This might not be much of a secret since most people can probably see how broken I am, but I can't talk about it because no one really cares about the sad, struggling girl. Story 11. I'm not going to say nobody will read this because I've read all the comments here, so I'm sure someone will. Here are some things I've kept to myself. I'm not sure where to start, so I'll just jump in. For reference, I'm female, 21. When I was around 5, there was a neighbor girl who was about 5 years older than me. One day, while we were playing, she brought me to her basement and tried to explain things to me that were beyond my understanding at that age. She encouraged me to act things out in a way that I didn't fully comprehend. Growing up, she continued to act strangely around me. When I was about 13, I was very into anime and also into online art communities. I spent time drawing on certain sites, and as young teens sometimes do, even posted a few drawings I'm embarrassed by now. One evening, my stepdad came into my room, holding a printed copy of one of my drawings. I was mortified, expecting to be in trouble. He made an inappropriate comment about it, and I've never felt more embarrassed or uncomfortable. All three of my pregnancies, the first ended in a miscarriage, were planned on my part without my husband knowing. He wasn't opposed to having children and loves them dearly, but he never realized that I had planned them. I still feel a little bad about that. When I was 16, I went to a friend's party, and I was the designated sober friend. After everyone went to bed, I found a spot in one of the rooms and tried to sleep. I didn't realize two others were in there. At some point, one of them woke up and acted inappropriately, and I was too shocked and scared to react properly. I didn't know how to stop him without making things worse, and I felt embarrassed. The whole experience left me feeling scared and vulnerable, but I didn't know who to tell. Later that year, I flew out an online friend I'd known since I was young. We'd talked for years, and I thought he was a great person. But when he visited, he was aggressive, both verbally and physically, in a way that left me shocked and hurt. He damaged some of my things and showed me a side of him I'd never seen before. I try not to think of the more painful parts of my life. I grew up in a challenging household, but that isn't a secret to most people who know me. Sharing this here feels like I'm finally getting it off my chest. My husband doesn't even know about these things. Story 12. Okay, so with thousands of comments here, there's basically zero chance this will stand out. Maybe one or two people might see it. Maybe. Here goes. I have a foot-related preference. That may not seem like such a huge deal. Lots of people probably think it's strange or unusual, but nothing that would ruin a life or anything. Well, I get that it's not that terrible, but to me, it feels overwhelming. The thought of it getting out is by far the thing I fear most. I don't even know why, but the shame would be too much to deal with. I feel like my life would be over, and honestly, I would feel intense anger toward anyone who spread it around. I'm not a violent person, but that would be my one exception. After that, even prison wouldn't seem like a big deal. My girlfriend knows. I told her in a moment of deep trust. She's fine with it and lets me express myself in my own way. She would never tell, no matter how angry she might be at me someday. Also, my best friend knows, only because I knew he wouldn't judge, and there's no way he would tell anyone. I even told him I'd be furious if he ever mentioned it, and he believes me. It feels strange typing this out, but maybe this attitude is normal for people with unique preferences. I don't know. Story 13. When I was around 8 to about 10 years old, I had an unusual and complicated relationship with my sister, who is about a year and a half older than me. It began innocently, like a form of playing doctor, and eventually progressed further. Whenever our parents would leave us home alone, we would go to the farthest part of the house, where we felt safe. I can't remember exactly what I was thinking at the time, but I don't remember feeling like it was wrong. I only cared about not being caught. When I was around 10, it just stopped, and I don't recall why. We never spoke about it again. Now, over 20 years later, I haven't told anyone, nor have I brought it up with her. It hasn't seemed to impact me emotionally in adulthood, but I sometimes wonder if that's why my sister and I don't have a close relationship, even though I have a good bond with my other sibling. I want to have a better connection with her, but I don't know how to address it without reopening old wounds. Today, I'm married and have children, and I have a healthy relationship with my wife. I don't think about it often, but this thread brought it back to mind. I'm grateful for others who've shared their stories here. It makes me feel less alone. In terms of how it affected me, it hasn't inhibited my adult relationships in any way, but some things have stayed with me. I don't bring up this part of my past, but I sometimes reflect on it, wondering about the best way forward. Story 14. I have a secret second life that I don't share with anyone. Growing up, I was a fairly typical boy in school. Good grades, decent social life. But when I turned 14, my curiosity and adventurous side came out, and I started meeting up with people I found online, much older than me. There was no coercion. I enjoyed every minute of it, even sneaking out of my parents' house for these adventures. By the time I was 16, I wanted to add more thrill to these experiences. I found that many of these people were willing to pay for my time. Throughout my late teens, I occasionally accepted money from people I met this way. I didn't need the money, but it added excitement, and I used a good portion for university expenses. I even had a few repeat clients, but mostly kept it casual. The thrill was my real motivation. Through the internet, I discovered various interests and even engaged with people who had very specific tastes. Over time, I learned how to keep this part of my life separate, and it never interfered with my studies or personal growth. I managed to complete my degree debt-free and have since moved forward. I don't feel particularly guilty about it since I was careful and stayed in control of my choices. However, if this secret part of my life were ever exposed, I would probably feel the need to make a fresh start somewhere else. Story 15. First, let me say I'm female. When I was younger, around grades 2 and 3, I had a series of encounters with my older female cousins. At that age, I was already surprisingly aware of certain things, which always puzzled me. Recently, I learned that I have 3 times the level of testosterone than the average female, which might explain my early awareness. It all started with my oldest cousin. We'd spend time together and things gradually developed. Shortly after, my second oldest cousin and I also became close in similar ways, though I honestly can't remember how that started. My third cousin eventually found out, and we ended up spending time together as well. We were young, but we talked about relationships and were surprisingly knowledgeable for our age. There was even a time when I felt a strong sense of jealousy when I learned that 2 of my cousins were close too. Looking back, I think this may have contributed to how I approach relationships and to my bisexuality today. It's all long over now, and I'm close with my cousins despite the distance between us. We haven't mentioned anything about it since it last happened over 9 or 10 years ago. Story 16. TLDR at the top because I like it on top. I was extremely curious about things as a kid, and my parents decided that ignoring it was the best solution. This led to years of anxiety, feeling like I was a terrible person. Eventually, I came to realize I'm just a normal person who had parents who didn't know how to handle my curiosity. Growing up, I was taught that anything other than abstinence until marriage was wrong. I remember being curious even as a young child, having thoughts and questions that I didn't quite understand. When I was around 12, I asked my mom a lot of questions, and she mostly dodged them. Shortly afterward, my dad sat me down and explained that intimacy was something only for a husband and wife, and anything else was wrong. When I asked more questions, he admitted his father didn't have answers either. So my talk ended up being more of an explanation of why I wasn't going to get any real answers. This led me to the internet, where I spent a lot of late nights secretly searching for answers. My parents eventually caught on and grounded me, but it turned into a kind of game for me, sneaking around, learning how to delete history, and finding ways around parental controls. At one point, feeling confused and frustrated, I started questioning everything. I didn't fully understand things, and in a misguided attempt to satisfy my curiosity, I even looked at my dog in ways that make me cringe now. I thought that somehow this made me a terrible person, and I lived with that guilt for years. But as I grew older, I began to understand that these thoughts and curiosities were just part of growing up. I no longer carry the burden of that guilt, realizing now that it was all just a normal, though misunderstood, part of development. I'm sharing this now because I've never told anyone before, and I feel ready to let it go. I don't feel guilty about it anymore, just relieved that I can move on. Story 17. I live in a neighborhood that's known for its iffy safety. I'm a bit of a scrawny kid in a mostly Mexican area. Shootings happen nearly every week. Gangs roam the streets. Any car not kept in a garage is prone to break-ins. And home invasions are a regular issue. It's not the ideal place to feel safe, especially being one of the few non-locals in the area. At my mom's insistence, I went ahead and got a concealed carry permit. After some practice and training, I started carrying a Springfield 1911 A1 with me whenever I left the house, just in case. One day, my car was giving me trouble, so I decided to walk over to the nearby auto shop to pick up a part. As I was halfway there, I noticed 3 suspicious-looking guys walking my way. I didn't make eye contact and just tried to look straight ahead. They were staring at me, and when one crossed the street, I knew this wasn't a good situation. The 3 of them moved into positions, one right in front of me, one behind me, and the last guy across the street. They stopped me and demanded my wallet and phone, so I handed them over as slowly as I could. Then, to my horror, they told me to get down on my knees. My heart felt like it was about to explode out of my chest, and I had a horrible feeling they weren't going to just rob me. The guy in front of me pulled out a knife. I heard what sounded like the clack of a gun behind me, and the guy across the street had a weapon too. My body went into overdrive. I turned around, pushed the guy behind me down with all my strength, pulled out my 1911, and fired 2 shots into his chest. Then I spun around and shot the guy with the knife once in the neck and once in the chest. The last guy across the street started shooting at me, but he missed, so I fired 4 rounds into him until he stopped moving. After it was over, I realized what I had done and panic hit me hard. I started hyperventilating. I wasn't prepared for something like this. I'd never expected to actually use my gun, so I was mentally unprepared. In my shock, I picked up my shells, retrieved my wallet and phone, and ran all the way home. I was in such a state of fear and confusion that I didn't even think about calling the police. I was completely overwhelmed and stayed that way for days. 3 days later, I saw the story on the local news. It was about 3 teenagers, no older than 17, who had been killed. I couldn't believe it. They reported that one of the weapons behind me had actually been a pellet gun. Later that day, someone knocked on my door. It was a man from the neighborhood who had witnessed everything. He told me he had already spoken to the police, claiming it was just gang violence. He said he knew me and my mother and didn't want to see us get in trouble, especially considering how those 3 had been causing problems in the area. He even mentioned that 2 of them had been involved in terrible acts, which shocked me even more. He thanked me for what I had done, shook my hand, and assured me the police were treating it as an open and shut case of gang violence. While his words made me feel slightly better, I still can't forget what happened that day. I'm seeing a therapist to help me work through it, but the memory stays with me. No matter the circumstances or what those men had done, taking a life is something I'm struggling to come to terms with, even if I had no choice. Story 18. I realize this thread is probably old now, but it took a lot for me to get the courage to make a throwaway account and actually post these confessions here. I have a few secrets, some of which I've never told a soul. My adult content preferences are very specific, and I often find myself drawn to themes that part of me feels conflicted about. I know my family, who are very conservative Christians, would be horrified if they found out. I don't have any real-life inclinations or anything, but being temporarily back at my parents' place, where privacy is limited, makes it feel even stranger. Growing up in such a restrictive environment probably led me to explore these things further, but I still feel like it's something I need to keep hidden. I recently got out of the military. My role was combat-oriented, but my unit was never deployed to active war zones like Iraq or Afghanistan. However, we did spend time stationed in the Philippines, where I had an experience that stuck with me. One night, after a lot of drinking, I ended up in a place I shouldn't have been. I found myself choosing someone I thought was younger because I felt like it might lower the risk of health issues. Looking back, I worry about her age. After the fact, I learned about cultural norms in the area and realized my actions may have left someone with lasting consequences. That night still haunts me, as I worry that I left a situation unresolved that I can never go back and make right. Even if I wanted to find her, it would be impossible due to the way things are set up there. My military training was intense, and my role involved being prepared for combat situations. Although I never actually went into active duty, I sometimes feel like there's a part of me that still wonders about the experience. I've been approached on 3 different occasions about going to work in dangerous areas for private groups, and while I ultimately declined, I found myself thinking about what it would be like to face life or death situations. There's a strange draw to the intensity of it, though I know the reality would be far different than anything I've imagined. The thought of it still lingers, though, like a challenge I haven't fully overcome. Story 19. This thread may be one of the best examples of how many people who feel sad, alone, or even truly ostracized from society are in fact not alone. Everyone has burdens, some heavier than others, but it's essential to understand that we are all fellow humans, just trying to navigate life and make it through. There's a lot of complicated stuff here, but these are people's lives and experiences we're talking about. So, the next time you see someone who seems down, or even just a stranger in general, consider taking that extra moment to say hello, ask them how they're doing, or compliment a friend tomorrow. You never know when your small act of kindness might be the thing that gives someone a little boost of happiness they need to get through the day. We've seen countless examples of kindness here on Reddit. It's entirely possible to make a difference in someone's life with a simple gesture, and nearly every story here is a testament to that. Just remember, even a small act can change someone's world. Story 20. I know this is probably lost in the sea of posts, but I just feel like I need to say it. Sometimes it helps to share things, even if no one is listening. I don't know if this would ruin my life, but it's something I will never tell anyone personally. It's one of those secrets that stays with me forever. The truth is, I really struggle with myself. I feel like I have a lot of self-hatred, and there are moments when I think about ending things. but I can never bring myself to go through with it. Every time these thoughts come up, I think about my family and friends, and then I realize I couldn't put them through that. I think especially about my mom and my brother. My brother and I are best friends, and he's mine. I can't imagine hurting him or my mom that way. Even though I often struggle with myself, they seem to see something good in me, and I wouldn't want them to suffer because of how I feel. So I go on, living with every small mistake, and those little things eat away at me. I mess up, often over small, stupid things, and I have a hard time letting them go. Even things I did years ago still bother me. It's like every time I make a mistake, all the old ones come flooding back. I'm terrible with people. I make errors, and it all just makes me dislike myself even more. Sometimes I daydream about things ending in a way where it wouldn't have to be my choice, but those thoughts are just part of what I go through. Maybe I'm rambling, but I just needed to put it out there. Thank you for this thread. I really needed to get that off my chest. Story 21. I get insanely, overwhelmingly attached to my guy friends, even those who are barely more than acquaintances. I have a boyfriend, and I truly love him, but I find myself fantasizing about his friends, my friends, and almost all of my male friends, except him. It's gotten to a point where I feel possessive of people who aren't mine in any sense. In my mind, they're mine, and I sometimes wish they would stay single forever because of that attachment. It feels wrong, I know, but I still find myself thinking they aren't allowed to have girlfriends. When one of my college friends started dating someone, I felt intense jealousy, even though I see him more often than she does during school. I obsess over my guy friends to a level that sometimes feels a bit over the top. I've even gone as far as looking up details about them that I'm pretty sure they wouldn't want me to know, like their license plate numbers. Once I sat staring at a photo of one of them for a full hour, just caught up in my own thoughts. This issue has gotten so strong that I sometimes create alternate realities in my mind where each of these people is mine. Sometimes I imagine each person separately, and other times I imagine us all together in a way that probably only makes sense to me. There have been moments when I've felt ashamed talking to my boyfriend because at the beginning of our relationship, this issue nearly ruined us. I've been doing my best to spend more time with him since he helps to push those thoughts away. Being with him calms my mind, and I'm grateful for that because I don't want to let these obsessions control my life. Story 22. All right, here goes. I feel like I need to get this off my chest. It's now or never. When I was younger, I was an extremely curious child, and unfortunately, that curiosity led me to make some choices I regret. I explored things I didn't fully understand, and this eventually involved my younger brother, who is 4 years younger than me. For context, I'm female, and this all happened from the time I was about 8 until I was 13. Eventually, the guilt became overwhelming, and I started feeling incredibly depressed. One day, my brother and I decided to tell our mom because we both knew it was wrong and couldn't handle the burden of keeping it a secret. She was, understandably, upset. That night, I felt so much regret that I tried to harm myself, but thankfully, I wasn't successful. My mom ended up taking me to a mental health facility where I stayed for about a week. She felt it wasn't helping me, so she worked hard to bring me back home. It wasn't easy, though, as there were some legalities involved. Therapists at the facility told me I might not be able to return home because of the situation, which only increased my anxiety. After I returned home, I began hanging out with the wrong crowd. This led to more trouble, including getting suspended from school and feeling even more disconnected from myself. By middle school, I was constantly dealing with flashbacks and panic attacks over what had happened, to the point where I couldn't sleep and felt uncomfortable around my brother. It wasn't until a couple of years ago that I finally felt comfortable enough to hug him without feeling guilt or nausea. I did see a therapist for a while, but oddly enough, she never brought up the incident with my brother, and it remained unaddressed. I managed to get through high school without any major issues, but I still retained a sense of curiosity about relationships. I told the first person I was with that I was a virgin, even though I had previous experiences, and that led to some drama I didn't anticipate. The guy used me to make his ex jealous, and I only found out after people started talking about it. After that, I tried to date normally and didn't face any significant issues until I graduated. The summer after graduation was incredibly difficult because my father passed away unexpectedly. Losing him sent me back into a deep state of depression, and I withdrew from my brother. He was coping in his own way, turning to things he shouldn't have at such a young age. Our relationship has never quite been the same. Another personal secret I have is that I struggle with certain attachments. I feel drawn to the idea of a daddy figure in my life, which is something my current boyfriend doesn't understand. He was put off when I shared this with him, but eventually, he offered to act as an older brother to me, which he thought would be better. I'm not entirely sure how comfortable I am with that, especially given my past experiences, but I'm trying to work through it. I can't believe I just typed all of that. It feels like a weight has been lifted, and I feel much better now. Story 23. Imagine this scenario. A young guy decides to pick up some marijuana to sell to younger kids and make a profit. An older guy receives my mass text and agrees to meet up with me. We meet in an alley, just him and his friend. As soon as we meet, they try to grab me, but I push one off. The other guy pulls out a steak knife and I see it glint in the sunlight. I jump over some bins and run for my life, heart pounding. Now here's the part I haven't told anyone. For the next 2 weeks, every single night, I stood outside that guy's house, the one who pulled the knife, plotting my revenge. I went over every detail in my mind, meticulously planning what I was going to do. The day of reckoning finally arrived, and I decided I was going to confront him for thinking he could intimidate me. I waited until he got home from work, stepped in through the door behind him silently, holding my own knife. As I looked up, I noticed his young daughter, probably no more than 4 years old, looking right at me. She locked eyes with me, and I put my finger to my lips, signaling her to stay quiet. She stood there silently, and there was something about the fear in her eyes that stopped me in my tracks. I stepped back out of the door without a word and left. I couldn't go through with it. Story 24. During my final year of college, I sank into a deep depression and eventually stopped attending classes entirely. To keep up appearances, I pretended to go to class so my housemates wouldn't catch on, but I ended up staying home most days. My GPA ultimately dropped to a 2.76, which pretty much shuts the door on grad school. Before the depression took hold, I was one of the top students, but I feel like I lost all my potential. Luckily, I'd completed most of my major credits before everything fell apart. I went through graduation feeling like a fraud, and when my diploma came in the mail months later, I was grateful yet felt undeserving. Unfortunately, I never really recovered from that time. I haven't held a job in 4 years, though I've been working toward an associate degree at a local community college. With the perspective I've gained, I now do well in my classes and have maintained a 4.0 GPA. But even though I'm excelling, it still feels like I'm just going through the motions. I have no idea what I'll do after graduation, and I worry that I'll never find a job. Every day I feel like my life is wasted. I don't have any intentions of hurting myself because, in a way, I already feel dead inside. I naturally want to help others and make them happy. But if my family knew how much I messed up my college grades, I think they'd be disappointed. My dad barely speaks to me because I'm not working. And honestly, I struggle with self-acceptance too. I'm also 30 years old and still a virgin. This doesn't bother me too much, but I'm aware that if I ever want a family, I need to start planning for it sooner rather than later. At the same time, I feel emotionally stuck at age 15. I find the idea of intimacy strange and marriage feels foreign. I've never had a boyfriend or even close female friendships. It's as if my life has been on hold for years. I keep hoping that once I find employment, things will change, but it's really hard right now. My lack of recent work experience makes it difficult to find anyone willing to hire me. I feel like I'm stuck, unable to move forward no matter what I do. For now, I'm just trying to keep going, even though I lack motivation. If I could find a way to move past this, maybe I could finally let go of the guilt over my college years. Story 25. This may seem like yet another complex family story, but it's quite different from anything else I've come across here. To begin, most of my experiences in life have been far from conventional. At the top of the list is a series of encounters involving my biological father. The first of these encounters took place around 3 years ago, when I was about 18. It began as an innocent interaction, a simple back scratch, but it led to more intimate actions. Alcohol was a significant factor, and we found ourselves sharing an unusual and deeply private experience. Afterward, we tried to make sense of it, viewing it almost from a detached perspective. Though the experience was certainly unconventional, I can't say I felt taken advantage of or overwhelmed by shame. It was consensual, and neither of us are very concerned with societal expectations. However, my father did feel emotional afterward, shedding a few tears while I found myself feeling oddly calm. Another encounter took place during a family wedding, and then once more during a visit with him. My parents have long been divorced. We've seen each other since then, and nothing further has happened. Although, we did have a discussion about how we were both handling things emotionally. To add context, my father and I have never had a traditional father-daughter relationship. Our bond has always felt more like a friendship, I don't feel scarred or damaged from these experiences, though I'm aware that I might have some unusual anxieties and behaviors. In general, however, I feel like a stable person, especially compared to some of the stories I've read here. If anyone in my family ever found out, I can only imagine the chaos it would bring, and I'm fully committed to keeping it a secret. Posting this here feels surreal, but reading similar stories from others gave me the courage to finally share my own experience. Story 26. This is on a throwaway because I don't feel comfortable posting it on my main account. For context, I'm female. My mom has been a single parent for as long as I can remember, and we've always been extremely close. I've always been her pride and joy, and we've had a unique bond. When I was little, my mom would sometimes comfort me before bed, letting me snuggle up to her in a way that brought a lot of comfort and security. I didn't think much of it as a child, but I knew it wasn't something I'd share with others. For me, it was a nightly routine where I'd feel safe and fall asleep more easily. As I got older, I became more aware of social expectations, and at around age 15, I decided to stop because I began to feel conflicted. Society seemed to tell me that this closeness with my mom was unusual, and I didn't want to create an uncomfortable situation for either of us. In some ways, I realized that my feelings were changing, and I didn't fully understand them. I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable, so I let it go. It's now one of my most vivid memories of comfort from my childhood. I sometimes feel that longing to have a similar experience with someone else, and it has influenced my attraction to nurturing and affectionate connections. I've thought about these memories occasionally, and they sometimes influence my dreams, which makes me reflect on how much I value that sense of closeness and security. Story 27. One time, when I was around 15 years old, my brother and I were hanging out at a nearby elementary school one evening around 9 p.m. We didn't have much to do since we didn't bring a basketball, and the playground was too small for us to use comfortably. We killed time for a while, but eventually I realized I needed to use the bathroom. Instead of walking the 3 minutes home, I impulsively decided to use the slide as a makeshift restroom. The slide was fully enclosed, almost like a tunnel, which meant the rain wouldn't wash anything away. This happened on a Sunday, and the next day I stayed home, casually keeping an eye on the park from my window. Around noon, when recess started, I saw a teacher helping one of the younger students go down the slide. To my surprise, they both ended up with a noticeable streak on their backs. From where I was, about 100 yards away, I could see kids laughing, and the teachers were clearly not happy. Recess ended earlier than usual that day because of the incident. To that kid and the teacher, especially the one with the white shirt decorated with roses, I truly apologize for the unexpected surprise and for ruining your day. Story 28. I'm a police officer, not in the U.S., and I was once involved in a case that still haunts me. It was an investigation into the assault of a young girl, and reading through the interview notes from the victim's account really affected me. She was just a few years younger than my own daughter, attending the same school. I identified a potential suspect to add to our list, and he was someone who was coming to the station regularly to check in. I waited for him at the station and spoke with him briefly, mentioning the case that was in the news. I talked about how the person responsible would be held accountable, and casually mentioned that we had DNA evidence. Something felt off. He wouldn't look me in the eye and gave vague answers even to simple questions. After he left, I reported my suspicions to my supervisor, who thought we might have enough grounds to request a DNA sample. However, our inspector suggested trying for a voluntary sample first to strengthen the application. I went to his home and knocked, but there was no answer. When I looked through the back door, I saw him lying on the couch. I knocked again, but still no response, so I opened the door and walked in. On the table, there was a note in which he expressed regret and admitted to certain actions, filled with self-pity, but no actual apology. He'd taken sedatives, which I could smell mixed with alcohol. In that moment, I felt a surge of anger and had to step outside to calm myself down. Without fully realizing what I was doing, I shut the door behind me and drove a few kilometers away. I then turned back around and intentionally drove my car into a ditch. Not hard enough to hurt myself, but enough to damage the car. I called in the accident and ended up going to the hospital for a mild concussion. My supervisor came to check on me, and I explained that I was on my way to the suspect's house when I crashed. He told me not to worry, that another officer would follow up in the morning. The next day, I received a call confirming my suspicions. The suspect had taken his own life, leaving a note with a confession. Since that moment, I felt like a different person, just going through the motions for the sake of my family. Story 29. Here it goes. I'm a 20-year-old college student, and I tested positive for HIV 2 weeks ago. For the past 2 years, I've been involved with a 36-year-old who is also HIV positive. He hasn't seen a doctor in a while, but somehow none of the people he'd been with had tested positive, not even his girlfriend of 4 years. I now know it was because he was in a stage where the virus is suppressed by the immune system, which can last many years after initial infection. And during that time, the risk of transmission is lower. I thought I was safe. I haven't told anyone yet. Last week, I met with a case manager who helped me understand the steps I need to take. I realized how reckless I was, especially since a year ago, when we were still using protection. It broke once, and I ended up going to the ER for antiviral medication. I had to tell my parents then, but thankfully I tested negative. In fact, I continued to test negative as recently as December. Since finding out, I've been overwhelmed with guilt and worry. He was so upset by the news that he got injured at work the day after I told him. Even though he hasn't always been faithful to his girlfriend, he is a good person who was honest with me about his status. I knew the risk, and I chose to take it. Now, I have to break the news to my parents when I go home for the summer. To make matters worse, my younger sister, who is only 16, has already struggled with her own health issues and has been hospitalized for attempts to harm herself. I can't help but feel like I've added more weight to my family's shoulders. If there's any silver lining, it's that I hadn't been involved with anyone else from January through March. If I had, there's a chance I might have passed the virus on, as this is one of the most contagious stages. Thankfully, it appears that my immune system is holding up, which might delay the need for medication, sparing my family additional expenses. My parents have always supported me, paying for my education and living expenses. This situation is entirely my fault, and I'm heartbroken over the impact it may have on them. Story 30. This might not seem too surprising to some, but it's a big deal to me because of my background and upbringing. I'm a Muslim woman in my early 20s. I wear a headscarf, pray 5 times a day, and I genuinely love my faith and believe in its teachings. Growing up in a very conservative environment where interactions with the opposite gender were limited, I felt grounded in my beliefs and routines. Then I left for university in the US from a country where life is very strictly guided by Islamic principles. I went from not having any close interactions with men to finding myself overwhelmed by the freedom and differences around me. To my own surprise, I ended up having intimate encounters with 2 different guys. The first guy made me feel special, listened to me talk, and gave me a lot of attention. After weeks of this, I ended up doing something I never thought I would. Eventually, things escalated, and when he tried to go further, I panicked. He reacted harshly, yelled at me to leave, and I later learned he'd had a long-term girlfriend back in his home country all along. The second person was a close friend, someone I'd always thought of as a brother figure. One night, after a lot of emotional support over my experience with the first guy, we ended up getting close in a way I didn't anticipate. I still wear my headscarf and pray daily. No one suspects I've done anything outside of my usual values, and I feel deeply conflicted. I love my faith and believe in its teachings, but I also feel a sense of guilt and hypocrisy. Part of me feels like I should stop wearing the scarf, but another part of me believes that I made a mistake, and I want to move forward without abandoning something that means a lot to me. Story 31. My life feels like a ticking time bomb, just waiting for everything to unravel. I was raised in a very conservative household, and during my teenage years, I went through a rebellious phase. I ended up dating a guy, let's call him Steve, for over a year before he broke up with me. I eventually started seeing someone new, but then Steve came back into my life in the worst way possible. He broke into my place and harmed me. I was too ashamed to tell my new boyfriend, so I broke up with him and tried to move on. However, Steve wouldn't leave me alone. We shared so many friends that it was hard to distance myself from him without anyone finding out what had happened. Not long after I found out I was pregnant, Steve learned about it through mutual friends and was convinced the baby was his. He became even more aggressive, calling me constantly, showing up at my apartment and making threats. I wasn't sure who the father was, but I didn't want to deal with Steve. He refused to let me pursue legal options that would end his involvement and demanded that I put the baby up for adoption. The harassment got so bad that I ended up moving in with my parents to escape him. Eventually, I faked a paternity test, showing Steve that my ex was the father. He believed it, and finally, I was free of him. Things calmed down for about 2 years. But then my ex-boyfriend found out that I'd had a child and wanted to reconnect, convinced that he was the father. I didn't know how to handle it, so I agreed to let him meet my son. My ex now has a family, and they're minimally involved, but they still believe he's the father. Meanwhile, my son resembles Steve. Since then, I've married. My husband believes my ex-boyfriend is my son's father and has no idea about Steve or what happened. I'm terrified that if I ever told the truth, it would bring chaos back into my life and hurt my husband deeply. I live in constant worry that everything will come crashing down if the truth ever gets out. Story 32. I'm half hoping this gets buried and half hoping it doesn't. This might seem small compared to some other stories here, but if I can at least write it out and maybe have someone read it, I'll feel a bit better. I've been lying to my parents, family, girlfriend, and friends for the past few months. I haven't been doing any of my college work, and I'm going to fail all of my classes. It's gotten to the point where I don't even go to any of my classes anymore. I just sleep all day and stay up all night. I went through a pretty low period and felt terrible about the situation I'd put myself in. In a way, I beat myself up over it. But even though I knew this was coming and understood the consequences, I honestly didn't care. My parents have been helping me financially, covering a lot of my college expenses. They told me after last semester that if I didn't get my act together, I wouldn't be returning. I get where they're coming from. College isn't cheap. And honestly, I don't even know if I want to study what I originally applied for. I'm not sure what I want to do with my life. I have passions, but they don't seem like practical career paths or things I can do well enough to pursue professionally. I used to love school and learning, but now it feels like a chore. I've been lying to my friends, telling them I'll room with them next semester, but I know that's not going to happen. I'm already on academic probation, and with failing grades in all my classes, expulsion seems inevitable. While everyone's stressed about finals, I've already decided I'm not showing up to mine. At this point, I feel like one of the most useless people on the planet and don't feel like I deserve the relationships I have with the people around me. No one deserves to be friends with someone who's failing like this, especially not my girlfriend, who's so driven and motivated. Everyone thinks I'm doing fine, and I put on a good enough act to keep them thinking that, but inside, I'm terrified about my family finding out. I feel like a terrible role model for my younger brother, who kind of looks up to me. I hate myself for the mess that's going to hit, but all I can seem to do is browse the internet to distract myself. Story 33. A few months ago, my girlfriend and I were at a party, just having fun and drinking casually, until she suddenly got upset with me, which wasn't unusual. Things escalated pretty fast as I tried to stay calm and not engage, but she took out her frustration by drinking more and more. Eventually, it was time to go home, and by then she was furious. She kept accusing me of things like cheating and looking at other people. So we're in the car, and she's still making these comments while I'm just trying to stay calm and ignore it. But she wouldn't stop. She kept slamming on the brakes in the middle of the road, then speeding up, repeating this all the way until we reached the spot where my car was parked. Once we arrived, she'd apparently had enough and told me, "Get out, and we're done, by the way." This wasn't the first time she'd said something like this, so I ignored it, got out, and went to my car, feeling frustrated. As I sat in my car texting a friend, I saw her slam on the gas, but she didn't realize her car was still in reverse. All I saw was her car suddenly fly backward, swerve, and crash into a house. At that moment, I was already angry about the whole argument and the way things had escalated, and I'd been drinking too, so I couldn't fully process what had happened. I ended up leaving the scene and driving away without checking on her. I got home, fell asleep almost immediately, still not completely grasping what had happened. The next morning, I remembered everything like it was a dream. I called her and found out she'd been charged with a DUI, illegal backing, and a minor in possession. No one knows I was there and that I left, potentially leaving her in harm's way. Story 34. I don't have a personal secret that could ruin my life, and no one here knows me, so there's no point in using a throwaway account for this. During my time in the service, I witnessed situations in which difficult decisions had to be made in the field. On a few occasions, my fire team encountered wounded enemy combatants who had sustained injuries that were severe and left no chance for survival. In one instance, a member of our team made the call to end the suffering of an individual who was critically injured. Although I didn't fire the shot, I was there to witness it. One of the more intense moments came when we captured a known explosives specialist in Fallujah. This individual was a relative of a prominent local figure, and our team needed critical information about nearby locations that were potentially dangerous. Under intense pressure, the platoon commander and sergeant took a strong stance to get the necessary details, which ultimately led to finding and neutralizing several hazards in the area. Another detail I remember was the widespread use of certain materials for various purposes during operations. While technically meant for specific uses, We relied on different tactics to ensure visibility and safety under the challenging conditions we faced. In high-pressure situations, the decisions made can be intense, but each action was driven by the immediate need to protect lives and fulfill our mission. Story 35. After following this thread for months, I figured it's probably safe to post now. I'm not here for attention, but maybe this will help me find some closure. I'm 19 now, but this all started when I was 14. I've always been really tall, and I tend to look and act older than my age, so I suppose that helped. I know this can't last forever, but here's my story. For a long time, I've had a habit of compulsively lying, but around 3 years ago, I took things to a new level. I was getting lunch one day when a girl started flirting with me, and she asked me my name. Without thinking, I made up a character named Thomas and just ran with it. Before I knew it, I was dating her, a 21-year-old who thought I was a 20-year-old student named Thomas Archer. I created a whole backstory for Thomas, met her family, and got to know her friends. Since then, I've created a lot of different characters and stories, each with its own life. Over the past 5 years, I've probably played at least 150 characters, maybe even more. I've sat through college lectures with people I was dating, gone to office parties, been offered a few jobs, and even went on a weekend trip with a prominent journalist I'd met while pretending to be someone else. I've faked my way through relationships, gatherings, and random adventures. Each character is different. Some are confident, others nervous, some are bookish, others athletic. I've created so many versions of myself that it's become second nature. Some of my more memorable characters include John Marks, a Russian substitute teacher. When I was 17, I was at an office asking for directions to my next class, and someone mistook me for a substitute gym teacher. I rolled with it, taught for the day, and even ended up making connections with one of the teachers, Arthur Malone, a 19-year-old character I made up while on vacation in Greece with my family. I went out as Arthur, met people, and explored a whole new life for a month. Ash Williams, a 22-year-old aspiring writer, I was 16 at the time. This character led me to meet the journalist I mentioned earlier. Donald Lennon, a musician, though I don't actually know much about music, who was a punk rocker at age 18. Each character has its own story, and I've had some memorable experiences. I've been asked about marriage, and once someone even tried to get me to commit to starting a family. Right now I have around 14 characters going, excluding the occasional one-time persona, including 3 girlfriends and a boyfriend. Somehow, nobody's ever figured it out. As myself, I'm actually well-liked, and I think the confidence I've gained from all of this has a lot to do with it. I don't know why I do it. I'm happy at home and have never had any particular issues. I worry that if anyone found out, it would destroy everything. I'd lose everyone's trust. Sometimes I imagine that one day I'll have so many characters going that it'll be too much, and I'll need to disappear as far as everyone at home is concerned. I think about moving to a quiet place, maybe even the countryside somewhere, and living a more settled life after all these years. Story 36. About 1.5 years ago, I was at a party and ended up in a situation where someone took advantage of me while I was under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Months went by, and I later discovered that I'd contracted HSV-1. I didn't know at first, and without realizing, I unknowingly spread it to others through casual contact. By the time I found out, I'd already distanced myself from friends, both out of embarrassment and to prevent any accidental spread. Since then, I've been avoiding everyone. I do everything alone now, and I've stopped responding to friends who try to reach out. I wasn't working at the time this all happened, and it took me until last month to find the courage to get back out into the world and get a job. Even now, I struggle to make eye contact or have conversations without feeling weighed down by guilt. I haven't told my friends the real reason I've become so distant, and I feel like they're starting to resent me for constantly bailing on plans. This whole experience has deeply affected how I view myself and others. I no longer trust easily, and there's been an unshakable sadness I carry daily. I sometimes think about ending it all, but I can't bring myself to do it because of my family. They don't deserve that pain, and I know it would hurt them deeply. This guilt has been overwhelming. I feel responsible for what I unknowingly passed on to others, and I think about it constantly. I've told my mom about the situation, and she's been supportive, though it's been tough on both of us. I'm hoping that by sharing this, it might bring me a small sense of peace, though I'm not sure it will.